participating. We hope you get a lot out of it. So the goal today is in really two parts. The first part of the presentation is to really talk about how we can maximize facilities management activities that can be performed during this period of partially occupied or unoccupied facilities, inclusive of reviewing considerations for your facilities during this period of being unoccupied, as well as their return to full occupancy. And then the second part is we really want to focus on how we can, some strategies to use this downtime wisely and maybe be strategic in the management and identification and planning around deferred maintenance in your buildings that you're tasked to manage, whether it be a single building or a portfolio of buildings. Really getting a good plan put together. We hope to leave you with some strategies in order to do that. Just some housekeeping items I wanted to go over quickly. So Tanya from our office, she's in the background. As we get started here, she's going to mute everybody's microphones, and we're going to allow time for questions at the end. If people want to voice questions, we'll unmute the microphones at that time. Or if at any time during the presentation you have a question and want to submit it, there is a chat function in Teams that will allow you to write a question. Tanya will aggregate them and ask them at the end for us all to answer. So just a little bit about myself. My name's Marek. I'm one of the owners at Performa, Architects and Engineers, and also the Vice President of Capital Strategies. One of my roles is I've developed and lead our Performa's Corrective Maintenance program, which at least philosophically we'll talk a little bit about today in the second part. I'm an electrical engineer by trade, so I've designed and engineered nearly every building type over the last 20 years. One of my primary roles at Performa is to help our clients link their capital assets to their organizational strategies. Just to, I guess, show everyone what I look like so you can put a face to the voice, everyone out there. Really appreciate you being on the call today. Let me get back to the PowerPoint. So my co-presenter today is Hollis Linehan. He's our Director of Design Build Services and also the leader of our Minneapolis office. So Hollis, if you just want to say a few words about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I've got decades of experience and hence the gray hair, but in engineering and leadership role, and have over the years, I started working in design development, in design build in the 80s, and have kind of continued in that and touched a lot of different delivery methods and focusing on the MEP side of the world. And I'm really happy to be here with Performa and you know, being part of this presentation. And I will also share a little picture of myself here, if program will cooperate with me. So I want to welcome everybody to my home. I am working from home, and that's kind of what we're talking about today is you know, what this means working at home and what we're doing with our facilities. And while you're here with me in my home, if I can get you something, a refreshment, a snack, I'll do what I can. No promises, but I do welcome everybody here to my home. And now we'll get back to the presentation. And
all right, thank you, Hollis.
Yep.
So just to give a quick 2-minute overview of Performa, if people aren't familiar, we're celebrating our 25-year anniversary this year, founded in 1995. We're integrated architecture and engineering. Our purpose is to help give our clients purpose, the space to thrive. So we feel form and function in a facility or infrastructure follows purpose, and at the heart of the facility needs is your purpose as an organization. We have 3 office locations, our primary office in De Pere, Wisconsin, and also offices in Atlanta, Georgia, and Minneapolis, Minnesota. As I mentioned, we are integrated architecture and engineering, and besides architecture, we have mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and structural engineers in-house, and we believe the integrated project delivery method produces the best results. And as it says, we link our clients' capital assets to their business strategy by enhancing what they already have and bringing something new to life. So getting into part one of the presentation, I'm going to hand it back to Hollis, who's going to talk a little bit about maintenance considerations at this present time in unoccupied facilities. And Hollis, I'll advance the slides for you.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, we can go ahead and to the next slide. And so I want to start a little bit, and we're talking today about unoccupied facilities and partially occupied facilities, and really the strategies in what you do with your unoccupied facilities, what are the right strategies, and how do you get back into reoccupying and making sure that those facilities are prepared for reoccupancy. We don't really know what the future is going to bring. I'm going to try and limit my discussion on the COVID and coronavirus topics, as we're all just being beat over the head with that stuff daily, and it's getting a little old, but it is relevant to what we're doing today. So, as we get in and we start looking at our facilities, the HVAC systems are a big part of the operation of our facilities, the interior environment of our facilities, and they're also a big consumer of energy. So one of the things that's a strategy is temperature setbacks within the facilities, both occupied and unoccupied. If you have a normal schedule, you reset your temperatures to a little bit less than what might be comfortable if people are in there. But that causes concerns over an extended period of time, where if you allow your temperature setbacks to go too far or for too long of a time, you have an increased risk of potentially condensation occurring when you have a cold surface and then it experiences warm temperatures with increased humidity. And those conditions can come and exist in a temperature setback configuration. There's also, if we go in and start resetting our temperatures in the summertime so that the interior spaces get a little warmer, if we decide we're going to save energy and reset our temperatures to 85 degrees, some of the newer, not the brand new, but the newer optical switches, they can only handle temperatures of about 100 degrees. And so those pieces of equipment can be very expensive, and sitting in a data closet with a temperature reset, they can actually be damaged and actually fail with an excessive temperature. Now, your outdoor air is typically in an operating building about 30% of the operating cost. So, it does make sense to selectively do some reduction of outdoor air to save energy and maximize value on buildings, both occupied and unoccupied, but you just need to make sure that we're looking at those very carefully. The other thing that can happen is we have interior construction finish materials that are manufactured and contain volatile or organic compounds, or VOCs, such as benzene, ethylene glycol, formaldehyde, and it's in furniture, it's in the floors of the elevators are built with, a lot of times with fiberboard that contains formaldehyde. And when we have a normally occupied building, we're bringing in fresh air, we're exhausting air. Those volatile organic, those VOCs are off-gassed just through normal occupation of the building, but that operating HVAC system will remove those VOCs from the interior space. When we start turning off the outdoor air, the VOCs continue to off-gas, and they can collect within the interior spaces. And also, when you have elevated temperatures and humidity, those things cause an increased level of off-gassing from building materials, finishes, and furniture. So, the HVAC is often looked at as one of the things that really is a driver in the interior environment and indoor air quality. And it's interesting that with the current situation that we're experiencing with COVID-19, it's actually been shown that the plumbing system is one of the biggest culprits in spreading the COVID or the coronaviruses within an occupied building. And actually, the World Health Organization did a study after the SARS epidemic in 2003, and they found that they had what they considered a super spreading event in a large building in Hong Kong. And what they found was that dry traps within the building were taking human waste within the waste system, aerosolizing it, and it was getting into the interior spaces. And actually, they found some of the viruses on hard surfaces because of that transmission. So, spaces aren't occupied, water isn't running in sinks, those traps can dry out, water in floor drains, those tend to dry out. So those are things we really need to understand and look at. We also have a concern over long-term period of unoccupied buildings where we start getting into the colder seasons, and especially in cold climates. And that is setting back of interior temperatures and having pipes freeze. Where normally during occupancy we have an HVAC system fan that's running all the time, the air temperature becomes fairly homogeneous within the space. The more those fans are turned off and only cycled when a little bit of heating is needed, the more those plumbing fixtures, plumbing pipes, and other types of water-containing systems can freeze up. So, in this considerations that we're talking about, these considerations we're talking about are really covering, on the move to a less occupied building, the existence and operation and maintenance of an unoccupied building, and also the transition of that unoccupied building into a, what we're looking at right now, which was the reoccupation of the workspaces as these stay-at-home orders are lifted. But when we look at an unoccupied facility, we want to understand what's happening with the current facility, and is it in a position to be unoccupied? Do the lighting systems have scheduled controls? And are we running lights when we don't have anybody in the building? Or is there a time clock control on lighting? Some of the critical lighting has, all lamps will fail. So if there's nobody in the building, is there a lighting system or component that's part of a security or safety concern within the building that may fail if nobody's in there and you don't know about it? And then we have security that's an issue, because when an unoccupied building exists, you have vagrants that can occupy elevator lobbies, stairwells, skyways, parking ramps, and they leave behind trash, human waste, and they tend to light fires. There's vandalism, graffiti, theft of copper and aluminum from building systems and utility services and water lines. And there's a lot of larger facilities that have blue light emergency phone systems that lost your screen for some reason. Oh, there we go. Thanks. So if those blue light phone systems start losing the service, well, then nobody's answering it, and it's going to be a false sense of security. Building access control systems, do they have an auto unlock schedule? Is there additional unauthorized entry detection and monitoring required for demand on for the building, where you normally wouldn't necessarily have a burglar type alarm, where you have glass break detection or occupancy sensors tied to an alarm system, or do you need to get some on-site security? And also, if your building is or may become unoccupied, you may want to check your insurance coverage, because some coverages don't cover somebody getting injured on the property if it's unoccupied. And we're a little bit about getting now into back into occupied facilities. We need to understand, we talked about what can happen in the interior spaces with humidity, mold, condensation. Those things can happen, but we also have roof leaks and plumbing system leaks and sun damage, where maybe some shading has been pulled down by manually by people that are occupying the building, and sun damage is now affecting the interior carpeting and other services, or other fixtures and interior finishes. The fire is a big concern. In between 2003 and 2006, the U.S. Fire Administration estimated an average of 31,000 structure fires in a building 161 deaths, 4,500 firefighter injuries, and over $640 million in direct property damage. That was each year during that time. And the NFPA has done a study that found that 40% of reported vacant building fires were intentionally set. There's regulatory considerations where a lot of the municipalities have requirements covering vacant buildings, where they can come in and actually, if a building is vacant, they can secure it. They can come in and actually turn off utilities, and if it's wintertime and in the right climate, they can move forward and actually winterize the building and charge you for all of those types of things. So, the opportunities exist today for if you have an unoccupied building, and Matt is going to talk about this, it's a great time to look at quantifying deferred maintenance and really getting in and understanding, where your building is at and what opportunities exist to evaluate your building and look at its operation, both from an efficiency perspective and ongoing operational perspective. And it's also a great time to look at implementation of recommissioning or retro commissioning programs, because those are a lot more cost effective when they happen when you're in an unoccupied or a partially occupied building. And recommissioning is really the tuning of the building to align with the original design parameters of the building when it was designed, while retro commissioning is optimizing the building system operation through selective updating of systems that provide short payback and an improved operating and interior environment. Many of the utilities, electric utilities and other utilities actually provide financial incentives that cover the cost of performing the commissioning, and they cover the cost of implementation of improvements or give rebates for those studies and implementation. Then, we have to get in and understand what it means to reoccupy the building. And again, we have, this is a little graphic that shows, what's actually happening when people are in a break room, or, today the most effective deterrent that we found with the current, virus that we're seeing, the COVID-19, is social distancing. But the virus does live, they found, on hard surfaces for a while. So, we have to, when we start getting into returning to the buildings, we have to understand the environmental conditions, and how they're being maintained during an unoccupied or partially occupied building. And if we had temperature setbacks, what's happening with the building? What needs to be addressed? If we have had the outdoor air off for a while, it may be prudent to do some building flush out, which is increasing the amount of outdoor air, or even doing some indoor air quality testing. The duct and equipment that is the duct work and the equipment for the HVAC system that's in the building should be evaluated. If any mold is found, you definitely want to take a look at cleaning the ductwork, cleaning the equipment. I think it's kind of just a given that you should change the filters, and also look and see if there's an opportunity and increase the level of filtration within the existing HVAC system. When we get in and start looking at the cleanliness aspect, we're getting into, disinfecting the frequently touched surfaces, trying to evaluate food preparation, warming areas, looking at, is there more hand sanitation dispensers required, can we look at increasing the outdoor air, or, again, improving the filtration of the HVAC system. There's also other things that can be done that, include evaluation of humidification within the building. Is it installed? Do you need it? Humidifiers are, the moisture is a breeding ground for mold and other contaminants. A lot of buildings don't necessarily need it. If you need it, understand it, maintain it, take a look at mold growth within the filtration system itself and where it's being done. Look at the ventilation rates. Do you have demand control ventilation, which is basically ventilating as needed for the people and the occupants? or do you need to maybe adjust that, make sure it's operating correctly, or even implementing it for cost? What's the current filtration in the system? There is an opportunity for UV disinfectant lamps to be employed in the building, and those are really, they are available for an interior occupied space as a standalone lamp, and they're also available they can be installed within the ductwork. The UV lamps for disinfection need to be a certain spectrum of UV light. They need to be the UVC spectrum. And that is the spectrum that the ozone layer blocks out and protects us from, because it is damaging to both our eyes and our skin. A UVC lamp can burn the skin and burn the retinas in just a very short amount of time. So implementing UVC lights, they need to be, training needs to happen of the maintenance personnel because they can be dangerous. Lamps also, it's recommended those bulbs get changed every year. So they maintain their effectiveness. But they do help with keeping HVAC coils and condensate pans clean. There's also technologies called bipolar ionization. It's basically cold plasma, and it is effective at taking care of some of the contaminants in the air. But it's interesting that CDC testing has found that, in a 10-foot test cube at 6 air changes an hour, the tuberculosis virus kill rate was 69% after an hour of operation. The norovirus was 94% after 30 minutes. So again, this is what we're dealing with today in our interior environments and spaces, is really that person-to-person transmission. So the thing that you really got to do is get it at the source. And it is a great opportunity while we have this time to look at, is there an option to upgrade the mechanical system? A displacement ventilation system is a great solution for a facility to improve the alternate. What we typically see is a mixed mode ventilation system. The displacement ventilation system actually uses the plume of the heat of the body to provide ventilation, and it stops mixing the air within the space. So, we have some thermal imaging cameras that are available, but they haven't been available commercially yet. And if you have a camera, the camera is not the solution. You've got to have somebody monitoring it, and you've got to have somebody that, if you have a system in place and people think that there's a sense of security, but it's not monitored, that can actually be more legal risk to you. So, planning for the future. The coronaviruses have been around since the 60s. Really, they haven't been considered a serious human pathogen until about 2003. And there's currently 7 identified coronaviruses that can inflict people. SARS, MERS, COVID-19. And one thing, we need to plan appropriately, because the current mortality rate of COVID-19, although widespread, is about 2%. Now, MERS, which was the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, the mortality rate for MERS was 35%. Now, since the longevity and the mutation of the coronavirus, it's pretty good probability that we're going to see another round of another mutation of the coronavirus in the future. We need to be prepared for it. And one of the things, a good business will have a business continuity plan, a disaster recovery plan. Those are things, if there's a flood, or if there's an earthquake, or a tornado, or some other natural disaster, we really need to consider an exposure control plan. What happens if an employee that has something that's communicable that comes in and exposes other employees? What do you do? And OSHA does have a standard 1910-1030 for blood-borne pathogens that has an effective exposure control plan outlined in it. It isn't really intended for a commercial building. It's more intended for people in healthcare facilities that are working with those pathogens, but it does directly address the pathogens of the type that we're dealing with the coronavirus. So we've got a new normal that we're working in right now, and really the most effective deterrent It's maintaining adequate personal distancing. It's really try and prevent virus spread through indirect contamination. And maybe we end up with an environment where we've got more than 6 feet of separation when we're getting into more condensed environments. And now maybe we're moving into an environment where it's a little more spread out. Next slide. And so, at Performa, we believe we exist to give purpose the space to thrive. Thrive means to flourish. It means to grow or develop in a healthy or vigorous way, especially as a result of a particularly favorable environment. So we're moving into a new normal, and we want to do everything we can to help you today in understanding what that means and help you moving forward as we move into this new normal. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Hollis. Good stuff. I appreciate the info. I think overall, it's just important as people re-enter the workforce and in the buildings for whatever purpose it might be, that you're helping everyone feel safe. Everyone has varying sensitivities around that. And half the battle is psychological. So if people know that a good plan is in place, you're not going to cover every contingency, but it'll help that psychological aspect of making people feel safer. So getting into the second part of our discussion here, another activity that can be performed during some of this time is really helping to get your arms around some of the biggest challenges that you have operating and owning facilities, which is understanding your deferred maintenance liabilities. And there's probably not a better time when facilities are lightly occupied to really dig into that. So I just want to impart you with some thoughts today. And what we're talking about when we talk about deferred maintenance is you have an operations and maintenance plan. It's an annual budget that you get to fund and operations of your facilities, and that's used to cover your general maintenance, your preventive maintenance, and your renewal and replacement of building components. When that that's underfunded every year, which oftentimes it is, you're in a situation where you're having to defer maintenance, often on the renewal and replacement side of things. And if you own, especially a portfolio of buildings, this deferred maintenance backlogs that start to generate can become significant in the millions and tens and millions of dollars. And that starts to require specific planning for what we call corrective maintenance to help draw down that deferred backlog. And it requires requests for additional funding because there's really no other way around it outside of specific capital projects. So when you have a big problem such as deferred maintenance of tens of millions of dollars, your temptation might be to want to study it, which is a good thing. I think studies are good. They get your data put in place so that you can communicate it effectively to the organization. But what the drawback I see a lot of times happen is that these studies are often treated as one-time events with few actionable outcomes, and they can get the organization's attention for a time being and get them excited, but there's no vehicle in place for adaptive change and continual change to continue to reinforce the need for year-over-year funding to continue to draw down your deferred maintenance plan. So having this corrective maintenance plan in place is really important. So the top 5 challenges we see with that today, which I'll address throughout the presentation, is really, first of all, helping your organization understand the impact of deferred maintenance. So the out of sight, out of mind concept is pretty prevalent in this area, especially if you do a good job of putting Band-Aids on things and no one's the wiser that the systems and building components are starting to fall apart. So getting the communication aspect in place. And the second challenge being keeping consistent data and metrics. So having that data that you're generating be consistent, relevant, and continually renewed. Developing and protecting your funding. So first of all, getting funding for starting to address these deferred maintenance challenges, and then ensuring it's continual and protected year over year. Raising awareness to all stakeholders, having a plan in place to enable proper communication throughout the organization of what it is that you're tasked to manage. A number of people on the call are facility management professionals, and your job for that organization is to manage one of their largest assets that they have on the books, which is their capital assets. And for them the organization to look at it as a facilities management problem versus a problem that requires all stakeholders in the organization to have an oar in the water, that's a communication problem, and we hope to impart some strategies to help that. And then finally, keeping the data relevant so that it's continuously being updated every year and your program is not getting stale in terms of both the data, the costs, and everything associated with that. So the corrective maintenance planning, you start with that. You want to ensure that you're integrating deferred maintenance with overall capital planning for the organization. So whether it be master planning of a campus or new capital projects, your deferred maintenance data as part of your corrective maintenance plan, it informs all of those initiatives. And then finally, ensuring that corrective maintenance is an institutional discipline, whereas it has visibility throughout the entire institution and it's viewed at as important as any other business function that needs to be attended to. Rooted in the foundation of a good corrective maintenance plan is a good facility condition assessment. So I'll talk a little bit about that process and how we feel it can be done well and how what some of the challenges are around it. So a facility condition assessment is, by definition, the structured development of a profile of existing facility conditions, typically placed in an electronic database format and populated with detailed facility condition inspection information. The FCA identifies existing deficient conditions in logical groupings and priorities, and also associated recommended corrections and their corrective costs. So you're really seeking to answer 4 questions with a good facility condition assessment. First of all, what are we maintaining? Knowing what buildings and building components actually need to be maintained and ensuring that information is known. What condition is it in? That's pretty obvious. What's the data-driven and strategic plan? So you're not going to be able to make all of the corrections at once because of the limited funding resources. So what is the plan you have in place to present to the organization that says, we really need to do this in year 1 and this needs to be done in year 5, et cetera, et cetera. And then what are the anticipated direct costs? So really understanding the true costs behind what this program is going to require. So what are we maintaining? Getting the baseline data established is really important, and we've seen organizations do this well and not so well, but just understanding what it is that needs to be maintained, having your database of facilities, your square footages and use types, understanding their current replacement values of both the facilities and its internal components. This is important because this communicates to the organization just really what the value of their asset is. And if they're not taking care of that asset, it's becoming a liability. So that CRV value is what everything is normalized around in these types of studies. Understanding the age of all your physical assets, its relative energy consumptions, and then even taking it a step further with this time of unoccupied or lightly occupied facilities, it would be great to really get a good database in terms of QR coding of your equipment, understanding make and model types of different building components. Getting all that put into a good database can be a great activity during this time. Finally, or next, what condition is it in? That question, well, we answer that through the facility condition assessment process, and we like to recommend it's a assessment process comprised of 3 components or 3 requirements. First, that it's structured and comprehensive, meaning it's a well-defined process. You know who is looking at these facilities, how they're being looked at, and that is comprehensive such that you're looking at from the top of the roof all the way to the edges of the site, every maintainable component within those facilities or within your portfolio of assets. And doing it in repeatable fashion that's data-driven with clearly defined parameters, so that that ensures you're looking at the same things the same ways in every building you go in. And if you decide to do this process again 5 years down the road, you still have an apples to apples comparison because the process is so well defined. And then finally, where we see challenges and where it's highly important is to ensure it's manageable. It's one thing to go through and identify deficiencies in facilities and bring up big numbers, but do these numbers come from very specific projects that are realistic, that the organization needs to do, that might even inform both work orders and major capital projects, so that it's actually a realistic plan with good direction coming out of it in the form of very specific projects. So what is the data-driven and strategic plan? So this is where you want to ensure you're putting good prioritization metrics around all these projects that are being identified through the condition assessment process. And we like to recommend, first of all, why do you do that? Because you have limited resources and you can't realistically address all of your deferred maintenance concerns at once. So the prioritization metrics should be objective, and that's what we like to recommend. We have 4 objective factors that we like to use, and being condition, utilization, relative importance of building components, and age. Condition is really just that, understanding what the condition of an asset or a building component is, represented by its condition index, which is really the cost of repair of that asset versus its current replacement value. It's a ratio. And then just understanding whether that should be done as in the next 1 year, 3 year, 5 years, or 10 years. So you're getting those future year budgets put into place as you go through this prioritization step. The next being utilization, and this comes into play where you have a portfolio of facilities that you're tasked to manage. This is really just the idea that not every facility might be of equal importance in your portfolio, and given equivalent funding, certain facilities should be given more attention versus other ones. And there's different utilization factors that can be used, but oftentimes occupant hours is a good metric. And we do this work for financial institutions, and a lot of times they like to use transaction numbers as a utilization factor in terms of its level of priority. So the next factor would be relative importance of building components. And this is really just the acknowledgement that not every component in the building is of equal weight to the function of that building. So for example, if you have a set amount of funding in a given year to put against a facility, and in that facility the roof needs to be replaced and the carpet needs to be replaced, well, this weighting is going to ensure that the roof gets the attention first, so that because it's more important to the function of that building. And finally, the age. So just understanding the age of the buildings and its internal components is going to be an important weighting factor. It's not the weighting factor. You do look at typical life cycles of equipment, such as chillers or air handlers and things like that, or roofs. But the life cycle is not the end-all be-all. Just because a chiller has an ASHRAE life cycle stated of 30 years doesn't mean that at year 31 it needs to be replaced. I think there's demonstrating responsible planning around well-maintained and performing equipment that's exceeded its statistical lifespan shows just good responsible management. And so even having a small degree of deferred maintenance within your portfolio does not necessarily mean you're not maintaining things. It could mean that, that you're actually doing it very responsibly and getting the most life out of the equipment as possible. And then finally, what are the anticipated direct costs? So one of the biggest things that could undermine a good corrective maintenance program that you're putting in place is to not have good budgetary data behind it. There's nothing worse than convincing a CFO of an organization to give you an extra $1 million the next fiscal year, and then you realize you've underestimated your projects and you have to come back for an additional $250,000. That undermines what you're trying to achieve and the trust and reliability of the program. There's a number of different resources that can help establish good budgets, whether it be estimating tools like RS means, but you have to be careful with those because you have to understand the full scope of the project, and RS means is not going to understand that. If you have good contractor relationships, they're always great to provide some good real-time cost data against something. And then using cost data from other projects you've done as benchmarks. And really, I can't stress enough understanding the full scope of a corrective project. And this is where oftentimes the budgetary process can fail. I'll give an example where you might have a boiler in a basement that needs to be replaced, and it's a $50,000 boiler. And that could be the cost of the project, but it also could be much more than that. If that boiler has asbestos piping connected to it that needs to be removed and remediated, that would be an additional cost. If you're not able to get the boiler in and out of the building without taking out doors or walls, that could be an additional cost. So ensuring that you have the holistic project cost, that's what we like to make sure we're doing. And then also having an idea of what, let's say you have to replace an HVAC system, a like-for-like replacement is not always the right way to cost a project because of new energy standards that have come into play, advancement in building technologies. So again, putting realistic budgets behind what needs to be done versus just like for like is also going to be important. So as you go through the full facility condition assessment process and you've identified, prioritized, quantified all these projects, what you want to get at the end of it is first a quantified total deferred maintenance backlog, a prioritized corrective maintenance plan. You want to be able to track the corrective action to enable forecast future capital spending for year over year budgetary needs, and then be able to generate real-time data to inform other planning efforts that your organization might be going through. So with a challenge this big, if an organization's never been through it before, it can often be a falling out of the chair moment if they're presented with data that shows they might need $30 million in corrective maintenance over a given period of time. And I think it's important to know that it is a challenge, but it should be a process and not necessarily just a sharing of information and then an asking for dollars. So with any challenge, we like to talk about this as a flywheel concept. Now, a flywheel, if anybody's familiar with that, they take a lot of energy to get going and to get momentum and to turn. But once they're turning and you have that momentum generated, then it's just a continual process of putting energy into it to ensure it keeps moving and moves even faster. And picking up that flywheel is how deferred maintenance is going to get drawn down within your portfolio of facilities, and it can be done a number of different ways. So this is a flywheel that we've seen pretty prevalent as far as it pertains to advancing deferred maintenance. I'll go through with the goal that corrective maintenance becomes an institutional discipline. It's not just a facilities management problem. It is something you're tasked to manage, but it has visibility throughout the entire organization. So the first step is just gathering that data, ensuring it's accurate, current, and continuous. And we like to say gathering data is like turning on the lights, and that's your facility condition assessment process. And then you want to start small, or you might need to start small, I should say. I'll give an example. One of our clients had identified $30 million in deferred maintenance. They had significant challenges on their campus, and they were only committed $100,000 the next fiscal year to start on their corrective maintenance program. And instead of seeing that as a discouragement, it was an opportunity for them to really make it visible and make sure that the program gets credit. So they used it to beautify the campus, to put shovels in the ground and landscaping, to do power washing, things of that nature that are highly visible. And then most importantly, communicating it regularly, the success of what has been happening with the additional dollars. And that communication aspect is going to help gain institutional commitment. And this is important because it needs to speak to all audiences in the organization, from the C-suite all the way to the maintenance technician level. Just to give you an example of what some of this communication might look like, here's an entire portfolio of facilities. The building components on the left-hand side, priority A, B, C, and D for when projects need to be done in one year 1, 3, 5, or 10, and then a total deferred backlog in the right-hand corner. So about 750,000 square feet of building, total replacement value in that portfolio, about 19 million in deferred maintenance, and a condition index of 10.4, which is in kind of the fair condition across the portfolio. Just another way to represent this at the 30,000 foot level, graphically shown by building component along the bottom, and then priority and cost. And then just more ways to break down this cost. And again, this is just a snapshot where you can walk confidently into a board meeting and they ask what their condition of their facilities are, good, bad, or otherwise. You can give them that answer. Just another way to represent this graphically, having color-coded examples of good condition, fair, poor, and very poor of your facilities, that 30,000 foot level. When you get to the 1,000 foot level, this is where you might be looking at individual facilities. And this would be of most interest to somebody doing planning around new capital projects or major renovations. But in this case, this is about a $10 million facility. It's in very, very bad condition. Anything over a condition index of about 30 is getting to a point where it's going to be very costly to renovate, or you might even want to consider replacing it. But just another way to represent this data as well graphically. And then at the functional level, this is where the program really needs to shine. It needs to be rooted in very realistic and manageable projects that need to be done. So ensuring that all those costs that were shown are coming from real projects that have real priorities and descriptions and dollar values attached to them. And the big numbers are just boil ups from these specific projects. And you can start to map out what fiscal year they need to be performed in. So as you've increased the communication throughout the organization, and you've maybe gotten that small amount of funding, really the challenge is going to be to continue to advance those funding levels, and you can only do that by regular communication, whether it be quarterly or as often as it needs to be for your organization, and then treating every year's funds as if they're your baseline budget for the next year, and then trying to grow upon that, kind of like the government. So maybe you could take a tip from them for once. In terms of the funding as well, it's important to keep it protected. So having this fund available for corrective maintenance, you want to make sure it doesn't get robbed for things such as programmatic changes or new capital projects, where the funding for those projects should really be coming from other buckets. And they all affect each other. New capital project that might replace a facility has a very positive impact on deferred maintenance, where you could remove $3 million in deferred maintenance just by replacing that facility, or a major renovation of that facility. But knowing that you have those dollars protected is important. And finally, you want to make sure that the data that you're communicating is available to inform other capital planning initiatives for your organization. So understanding, like that example with replacing facilities, knowing their deferred maintenance backlog is actually a savings to that organization against a new capital project. Or if they need to renovate do a major renovation on a facility, being able to communicate to them that they can't just put a new coat of paint on the walls and carpet on the floor, that in order to keep the facility functional for future purposes, that they might need to claw into that infrastructure a little bit more. And the corrective maintenance plan will communicate that. And then finally, the goal is that the corrective maintenance program becomes an institutional discipline. Is, like I've said, that it's not just a facilities management problem, but it has equal or important weighting as any other business function that organization needs to be aware of. So with that, I want to turn it over to Tanya, who she can ask any questions that might have come in over chat, or allow the microphones to be unmuted as well. If anyone wants to ask a question in real time, just speak up, and we'll try to moderate this as best we can.
That sounds good. Thanks, Matt. We had a few questions come through on the chat function. So I'll start with those and then we'll unmute all the participants. One of the first questions was, how do you calculate CRV? And,
yes,
yeah. Go ahead.
That is a great question because I like to think of it as much of an art as it is a science. And the reason I say that is it's highly dependent on geography, current economic conditions. And so and even if you use a program like RS Means, I think they generally undervalue CRV. And then a lot of times the real CRV does not align with insurance projections. There are a number of insurance companies who will go through and undervalue the current replacement value of facilities because it makes it more favorable in terms of having less lower payments on the insurance. There's one in particular that I can think of that's their business model is they can undercut their competitors by undervaluing the facilities. So it takes a very close finger on the market to ensure you're doing this well. And so we'll generate data from recent construction projects in particular areas. And we have a number of ways that we can do that through contractors, through clients, through projects that we've done. We'll break it down also by division type and ensure that those division costs are aligning with current market conditions. So it's not an exact science and it is a little bit of an art, but once you've gone through a few, and I can show you some examples, if you want to follow up with an email, we'll share information at the end of this. I can show you some examples of how that's done.
There were some follow-up questions to that might help with sharing some information afterwards. One was, as you work on an FCA, how critical is it to having access to accurate asset service history available from a CMMS?
Well, I like to say the more information we have, the better the process will go. And we're pretty adept at getting into situations where there's not even a drawing available or any data available for us to start from. But the more data we have, the more relevant and exact the outcome can be. And so we really like to, even before we start the process, encourage this baseline data gathering through the CMMS system, and whether it be QR tagging and things like that. And we have great partners that we've worked with in the past who do that very efficiently, and we can make recommendations on that cataloging aspect. But it is very important.
And another question, as a preparer of FCAs or facility condition assessments, do you have any recommendation for your customers on the most effective way to fully leverage the value of an FCA?
Well, we do. The value is going to come in through the data that's shared, and what I think can keep people up at night is, whether it be CFOs or otherwise, is not understanding the true cost of doing business and the true liabilities that are out there. And those come up often as surprises in terms of all the fiscal year budgeting is done for a given year. And then there's a surprise of $300,000, $500,000 for emergency facility repair projects that weren't known about. And that happens quite often. And that's not a reasonable approach for an organization. And frankly, it reflects poorly back on the people who are tasked to manage it. So it's really the value comes in as it's really part of the job of managing and expecting to continue to operate facilities, that this type of work is done, whether it be done by an outside entity or internally, but that work is performed.
Great. One more question. How do you leverage your customers' maintenance techs when you are working on an FCA?
Heavily. And we would recommend that when we do it, that they are partners in the project. as smart as I like to think we are, we will never have the knowledge in a building of someone who has lived and breathed it for 30 years and knows every nook and cranny. And we want to make them part of the process. Sometimes they like to be in the square foot by square foot walkthroughs and going room by room, and other times we'll interview them and then circle back with them on what we've seen and get data from them to ensure we're understanding the full scope of this entire initiative. But yeah, they're a wealth of knowledge.
I think those are the questions that have come through on the chat. And I know we want to leave maybe 1 or 2 minutes at the end to wrap up, but we probably have time for 1 or 2 more questions. I would invite anybody that's attending if they would want to unmute. I don't think I can unmute them. If anybody has any additional questions, we can definitely open it up at this time. Or if Hollis or Matt, if you have any additional thoughts.
Well, yeah, this is Hollis. I did want to, I really appreciated both Matt's response and the question about leveraging a facility condition assessment, because I think that, you know, I know that I have, and I know Matt has also walked into a facility where one of his slides said, we need to study our studies. And you walk in and there are binders on a shelf from previous assessments and studies. So having that be part of a process that's ongoing and not just a static study that has no continuity or continuation or plan for effectively using that is key to all of us. And that's what Performa's corrective maintenance program really allows the stakeholders in the facilities and ownership of those facilities and at all levels to be able to leverage.
Thank you. We have one more question. Ideally, what documents and information would you like to have access to as you prepare for an FCA?
Ideally, at a minimum, it would be really nice to have up-to-date floor plans of facilities, or even maybe not even up-to-date, but general floor plans, because it makes it so much easier going through the documentation process. We can put them into PDF format and use them on iPads. But you know, we even have tips and tricks that we've used where we don't have it. We can use the emergency egress plans and scan those in, because those are in place in just about every facility. But it is amazing how many organizations don't have good just floor plans, which you can use for so many different purposes, creating RFPs for work that needs to be done and things like that. On top of that, it is really nice to have that database of facilities and their use types, because that helps the current replacement value estimating. And then we've been blessed in the past with having full binders of previous maintenance data on pieces of equipment, and we will go through those.
Matt, I think you're breaking up. Hollis, are you still on?
I am. It reminds me of an old Star Trek episode. You're breaking up, Scotty. I'm giving her all I've got.
Well, I think I'm just looking to see here if we have any additional questions. Again, I'll just pause for 5 seconds to see if anybody has additional questions. And then we do have just one final information to wrap up with and some additional resources we can share with people.
Yeah, and I would like to, again, thank everybody for taking time out of their day to join us and be part of this webinar. It's been a pleasure to be able to share information with you. Thank you again.
I would like to thank everyone as well. Today's slides and recording, we will follow up with an email, but here's the link as well that you can find the PowerPoint that we presented as well as the recording. If you would like a copy, we have some more information on some of the things that were presented today in more detail. So we have a white paper if you're interested in that. Please feel free to email Matt as well. And we just thank everyone for their time.
Yes, thank you very much. Have a great day, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.